What's going on, everybody? Welcome into the SFS channel. My name is Gavin, and in this episode, I'll be diving into my top 30 wide receiver tiers and rankings for Week 13 fantasy football. We have got, for most of us, Week 13 here, Week 14, and then it's fantasy playoff time. So we're looking at some pretty big lineup decisions and situations here for those of us that are in make or break spots for this upcoming 2-week stretch of time here. So hopefully you guys are feeling good about your lineups. Hopefully you've got some players peaking at the right time of the season. We're going to talk about those players and others who might be on the downfall here towards the rest of the way of talking through those matchups and a whole lot more in today's episode. So if you're new around here, smash the subscribe button, give today's episode a like, and turn the bell on so you're never late for a new piece of content. A little PSA here, our running back segment is also active for today, so you can go check that out once you're done watching today's episode, and let's dive in. So as I do every week here, we're going to toss that first tier right on up there and basically just walk through the matchups. These are the best of the best players. The order, not necessarily so important as much as the overall caliber of these players is. Devontae Adams is my wide receiver 1 this week against the Chargers, a secondary that has been hit or miss this year. More often, I would say miss than hit. Stephon Diggs this week taking on the New England Patriots. We've seen Bill Belichick struggle to find a true way to shut down Diggs in previous matchups throughout his tenure in Buffalo, throughout Diggs' tenure in Buffalo. Very confident with him tied to Josh Allen as always. Jefferson would be a bit higher than Diggs had the matchup this week not come against Sauce Gardner of the New York Jets. The Jets secondary has played exceptional football here. No doubt in my mind that the Vikings will find ways to get Jefferson the football, but it is a potentially scary matchup for some. And then Tyreek Hill here this week taking on San Francisco, another matchup that's been very difficult across the board. Their defense has played very solid football. And at the end of the day, if Miami's offensive line, which is a bit banged up right now, isn't fully healthy heading into this game, that could impact Tua's ability to deliver the football on time and on target here this week. So things I'm thinking about, some tougher matchups this week for those top 4. But obviously, they're the top 4 for a reason. These guys are absolute studs. Into my wide receivers 5 through 8 now. This is our second tier of fantasy receivers. Welcome back to a top tier position here for Ja'Marr Chase. So I do have him as a tier 2 player just because this is the first week back off of a pretty significant hip issue. So hopefully he's able to actually play this week. We had him on the tiers at a bit of a lower stage, and for good reason, because he ended up not playing. That was kind of my skepticism, is that maybe late in the week he gets out there and they decide not to play him. I was happy to see the cautious and conservative nature of the coaching staff. I would rather have Ja'Marr Chase the last 5 weeks of the season than have him for potentially an additional 6th at half strength and have him get injured again. So Ja'Marr Chase here against Kansas City, he has absolutely terrorized them in his last 2 matchups against this team. AJ Brown this week, a revenge game against his Tennessee Titans. The one weakness of this Titans defense is the secondary. If the run game gets going, play action could be absolutely lethal for Jalen Hurts hitting up A.J. Brown down the field. Amon-Ra St. Brown finally popped out last week. He's been doing well for a while now, getting consistent target volume. This week the Lions have Jacksonville. Not a matchup that scares me overly much, and I just love the fact that Amon-Ra can get out there and be a target magnet. Not that it really impacts him that much, but it sounds like Jameson Williams is kind of a long shot to play again this week, or that's the report I saw from a quote from Dan Campbell. So regardless, I'm not expecting it to have too much of an impact. Just thought I'd toss it out there for those who have maybe added him on the waiver wire or something this week. And then CeeDee Lamb here taking on the Colts. This is a matchup where CeeDee Lamb is, I think, emerging as a very solid wide receiver 1 for the rest of the season. Him and Dak Prescott, 100-yard games in 2 of his last 3 contests for CD. He's always had the talent, but it seems like it's finally starting to click here, and he is the true alpha for this team. Loving what I'm seeing. The ceiling seems to be growing here, and the floor hopefully can stabilize itself as well. This Colts matchup isn't a super easy one, but if Dallas is able to have their way here, they could obviously contribute a high level of points against this team. Quick note, this week we actually don't have the Carolina Panthers or the Arizona Cardinals. Those are our Week 13 buys. Thank goodness, just one more week here, Week 14 after this week is done, but it's postseason time, so hopefully those bye weeks don't crush you here down the stretch. But kicking it off with my wide receiver 9 for this week, moving through our wide receiver 13 here. Amari Cooper against the Houston Texans. This is a fairly solid matchup. Now, the one thing, this could really go one of 2 ways. Either A, Deshaun Watson comes into this game and lights up his former team, shows us the true difference maker he is for this offense, or he comes back and he's rusty because he hasn't played football in over 700 days. So the latter might be a little bit more risky in terms of, the floor competence for Amari Cooper here. We'll see how things play out. I do think, though, there is the opportunity for that mega ceiling. Jalen Waddle's got San Francisco this week. We talked about it with Tyreek Hill. It's obviously two elitely talented players. They're just going to need Tua to have time in that backfield to distribute the ball. That's all he's got to do. These guys can get the job done after the catch. T. Higgins against the Kansas City Chiefs, like we talked about with Jamar Chase. It's an exploitable secondary, and if especially Jamar's on a pitch count or something and doesn't really get out there for 100% of the snaps, you're going to see T reassert himself as the alpha in this offense. Now, last week, he made some really incredible plays against Tennessee. He's capable of doing that. I've said this multiple times this season and throughout his young career here. If Jamar Chase was never drafted by the Cincinnati Bengals, T. Higgins could easily be their number one receiver. He is still, in my opinion, a fringe wide receiver one in fantasy football, despite the fact that he's the number 2 wide receiver on his team. DK Metcalf here, he's been absolutely balling out lately. This week, the Seattle Seahawks are taking on the LA Rams. Now that means Jalen Ramsey. However, Jalen doesn't really shadow that much anymore, and he's also kind of a shell of himself. He is getting cooked, fried, toasted, baked, seared, everything that you see out there. Travis Kelce had that man playing Ring Around the Rosie. It was bad. So, bottom line, I'm not scared of this matchup. This is also a bad Rams football team. Seattle should just crush, the time of possession, even if it's not an extremely ugly blowout loss for the Rams. I am expecting Seattle to dictate the pace of this game. And, of course, DK is going to get a couple of Geno bombs put up there for him to hopefully make a big splash play out of. And then Keenan Allen, just bottom line, he is a stud floor player. His ceiling isn't as high as actually anyone else on this tier or anyone else in the first 3 tiers here, but I would argue his floor is better than a good chunk of these players. For example, Amari Cooper, talked through my concerns there. Heck, Jalen Waddle as the second target leader for his team. Even a T. Higgins here, maybe DK, it's debatable. But what you're looking for in a matchup here against the Las Vegas Raiders is just simply target volume and getting reception value underneath. Yards after the catch, hopefully finds the end zone as well. That's where you can start getting close to that 20-point marker, but it's not all that often that you actually see that occur. All right, the next 5 here go in our tier 4 slot, kicking it off with Terry McLaurin. So for Terry, he is definitely a guy that I would argue has a higher ceiling than someone like a Keenan Allen, just a tier above him. But really the trend here with the Washington Commanders, especially the Taylor Heineke Commanders, is that the floor for any of these receivers in any given week can be quite low. So I'm always cautiously optimistic with Terry and his weekly fantasy value. He has torched the Giants in the past, but he could also come out here and torch you. He is probably, the most underrated wide receiver in the league in terms of the game he provides to his team. However, it doesn't always translate into fantasy points here. Chris Godwin, for me, is now the rest of season wide receiver 1 in terms of a fantasy perspective for this Bucs offense. He's getting so much volume and actually gets the volume that counts for this team. Mike Evans just hasn't been delivering on that opportunity. As a matter of fact, the reason you're going to see him in the 5th tier here for today. But I trust his floor much more than I trust in Evans today, and I'm just looking to roll forward with that volume underneath out of the slot. Christian Kirk against Detroit. If you can't get open against Detroit, you've got yourself a problem. This is a wide receiver 1 still for this team. Obviously, Zay Jones was kind of the hero. Actually, Marvin Jones as well was kind of the hero. But Zay Jones is the more productive player. Christian Kirk, to me, is still the more valuable asset, and I trust him in this matchup. We actually saw another slot receiver, Isaiah McKenzie, just annihilate them on Thanksgiving. Tyler Lockett, same matchup here for this week for the Seattle Seahawks is DK Metcalf. If you don't remember, that's the LA Rams. Tyler Lockett actually has a very good track record against the Rams throughout his career. Now, some of that was with most of it was with Russell Wilson. But as a deep threat, obviously, they can stress the defense in unique ways here. And he's actually been a bit more of a safety blanket than usual this season. And then Debo taking on Miami. It's going to be a health thing. He got he entered into last week nicked up. Continually got more nicked up in that game. We'll see what his status and availability is here. But obviously, you're looking at him as a wide receiver 2 level player should he be healthy and on the football field. Into tier 5 now, I could not be happier to have some of the names on, actually just really one of the names that I'm a huge fan of on this list. But for Mike Evans, I talked about it. He's been getting very solid target volume, yet his role in this offense hasn't really been rewarded with the fantasy fruitfulness that we've been hoping for. He hasn't scored a touchdown since week 4. I think I've said that 100 times in videos over the last month, but it continues to be, the most recent touchdown he's had. Now, eventually, sooner or later, he will break that and snap out of it and score, but the bottom line is they aren't getting red zone passing opportunities. You don't have a distraction like a massive Gronk in the red zone either to draw attention away from him. So you've really got a team right now that's become very one-dimensional, and despite their insanely high pass passing volume, they aren't really turning that and translating it into fantasy production here, which is a big problem. Brandon Ayuk here. If Debo misses, obviously that's a huge boost for Ayuk stock. He's insanely talented. He's a number 1 receiver on a handful of NFL teams in the league. However, he happens to be the number 2 for this roster. Again, against Miami this week, he's more of a run after catch weapon than anything. He's a fantastic route runner as well. So they can obviously use him in a variety of different ways to get him the ball. I look at him this week as a lower end wide receiver too, with obviously a tremendous amount of upside. And then Garrett Wilson, my wide receiver 21. This is the guy that I'm excited to have soar up the rankings list here for this week. Minnesota's weakness, their vulnerability is the secondary of their defense, and boy, oh boy, Mike White, baby, all the difference he makes. I am excited to see if he can follow up his performance against Chicago. Can Mike White, here's the real question, can he just annihilate the NFC North? Unfortunately, they already played the Packers, and so we're not going to get to see that matchup, but you do have the Bears, the Vikings, and then maybe Detroit plays them later in the season. I'm not sure. They might have already just played recently, and it's just blanking my mind. But he could potentially torch up to 3 of the NFC North teams. Let's get it done this week. Mike White against the Minnesota Vikings. Garrett Wilson, obviously, being the number 1 receiver there, the most talented of the bunch. Hopefully, this also means good things for Elijah Moore stock for any owners of him. Ladies and gentlemen, mark your calendars. So I went and checked the schedule. Mike White, should he still be the starter, has an opportunity to potentially slaughter 3 of the 4 NFC North divisional teams. Of course, the Jets actually defeated the Green Bay Packers, so they could potentially sweep the NFC North. Now, that's quite presumptuous of me to assume that they're going to go out here and beat the Vikings this week, but they do, on December 18th, play the Detroit Lions, so they've already taken care of business and are 2-0 to start off against the division. Into Tier 6 here by wide receivers, 22 through 25. Chris Olave starting it off against Tampa Bay. Look, Chris Olave, please, Mr. Dennis Allen, switch your freaking quarterback. It is pissing me off to watch Andy Dalton just have an inept ability to lead this offense every single week. Now, Olave's talent, his field stretching ability, and his route running keep him as a wide receiver 2-ish level player for me each week. Now, there is a drop-off, I do believe, because his floor kind of sucks on a week-to-week basis because, like I said, this offense is a disaster and a mess right now. They have a lacking identity, so that stuff concerns me, but always the ceiling is high here. Cortland Sutton this week, Denver taking on the Baltimore Ravens. Sutton has a chance to yet again be the lone receiver for this offense. It's a really low floor, low ceiling type scenario, but it's kind of in like a middle ground position where you can still get enough value out of him to have him as a starter or a flex level player. So not someone to be excited about starting, but definitely an opportunity. Michael Pittman coming off of a fairly solid game on Monday night against Pittsburgh, so he scored a touchdown, had a really big catch to kind of save his value late in the last drive of the game. He's a really talented, solid player. He's the wide receiver 1 for this team. Obviously, though, limitations with Matt Ryan. They've got Dallas this week as well, which kind of scares me if I'm being honest. I think their pass rush could just totally eat those offensive tackles alive, especially Bernard Raymond, who's been really struggling in his transition. I think it's his 3rd or 4th start of the season was Monday night. And then Juju Smith-Schuster here taking on Cincinnati. Hopefully he's healthy this week. He was obviously on a pitch count and kind of a playing time limit here in that first game back. I forget at what stage of the game I heard the announcers say he had only played 5 snaps. So that'll go up once they trust his health and are comfortable with him involved in this offense. Very good right after catch player, and of course deserves to be a flex level candidate should he be out there, which of course we're expecting is the case, but hopefully on a higher snap percentage basis. I should note this as well before diving into Tier 7. So no Mike Williams in today's episode. I'm fairly skeptical that he plays this week, so that's just the reason he's not in there. If he does play, he's obviously a super high ceiling, pretty low floor wide receiver 2 for this week, especially in game 1 back here. I don't think they were cautious enough and limited him in that first game, and unfortunately turned his ankle the wrong, or actually stepped on somebody and turned his ankle. So that's why you're not seeing him today. Into our wide receivers 26 through 30, though, starting it off with Christian Watson. Now, this has been an absolute just stud find off the waiver wire as of late. 6 touchdowns in 3 weeks here. Now, he went from 3 down to 2, down to 1, so hopefully that trend doesn't continue for a fat old goose egg this week. However, he did still go for a really good game against Philadelphia. Had that massive 60-plus yard score and 3 other catches to catch 4 of his 6 targets. Now, For Christian Watson here, the ceiling is sky high. It's one of the reasons that you want to have him on your team as a wide receiver 3 or flex level player. The floor, though, is quite low because you're not getting, 8+ targets per game. That's just how it goes here. So manage your expectations. Could win your week, though, of course, in any given matchup. This time around, it's an abysmal Bears defense that got fried by Mike White last week. Deontay Johnson, Atlanta here. The arguably best, one of the best at the very least, matchups for opposing fantasy receivers and just an overall passing game. Now, Kenny Pickett looked very good against the Colts. He is starting to improve. The last 2 weeks, I've seen progression. He's gotten better each of those 2 games at various things, especially just throwing the football and getting the ball out of his hands. And extending drives with his legs has been important as well. So that adds some value here to guys like George Pickens, who we'll talk about in just a second. Devontae Smith here. The Eagles this week taking on, I forget who the Eagles have. They have Tennessee. I talked about this earlier today, of course. Devontae Smith is just kind of a volume dependent wide receiver 2 in terms of his offense. He's more of a fantasy wide receiver 3. He's very good at run after the catch. He's an excellent route runner. He just needs to score a touchdown or get more volume than A.J. Brown, which has happened at points throughout this season. He's just more of a riskier lineup play. Gabe Davis, if you want to talk about really risky lineup plays, it's boom or bust. He's busted 4 of his last 5 games, though. Only has 1 double-digit performance in that span of time. So disappointing stuff there. Honestly, the matchup doesn't seem to be a huge contributing factor to the situation. But, last week against Detroit, it was McKenzie just completely annihilating them and Gabe Davis having another stinker. So Buffalo this week against New England, maybe if they try extra hard to take away Diggs, Davis steps up here and shines. But at the end of the day, you're basically just playing, kind of a double jeopardy type thing. And then you've got George Pickens. So Pickens against Atlanta as well. I'd say this is a 1A and 1B situation with these receivers. They're both insanely good. For Pickens, he probably needs a big player, a touchdown. That's kind of been the trend here, but it's a great matchup. On paper, he should be able to succeed if Kenny continues with his development in a positive direction. So there you guys have it. My top 30 wide receivers here early. This is coming out on a Wednesday morning, so I actually lied in an earlier episode. I said I was recording this Wednesday night. That is impossible because I'm recording it on Tuesday, and it is coming out on Wednesday morning. So unless you guys thought I was a time traveler, I simply messed that up. If I was a time traveler, I would actually be really cool because then I could just go to Sunday, tell you what happened. I could be 100% right on all my picks. But clearly, not the case here. We have some good ones, we have some bad ones, and everything in between. That's how it goes here with fantasy football, but we love playing it, and we come back swinging every single week. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. I appreciate the heck out of all of you for staying tuned throughout today's episode. Remember, the running backs episode is live right now. Go check that out or some other episodes live on the channel, and I'll see you there. Peace out.